The day before the declaration of war, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain appointed Winston Churchill as First Lord of the Admiralty. 25 years earlier, Churchill had held the same position and had prepared the British Navy to fight in the First World War. On the day of his appointment, the Navy sent a message to all its ships: Winston is back. Churchill understood the importance of maritime supremacy for his country's survival. Although submarines were the greatest threat to the British Navy, they were not the only one. Germany had many combat-ready cruisers, in addition to 3 pocket battleships and 2 heavy cruisers. All of them were more modern, faster, and more powerful than any British heavy cruiser. When it became clear that war was imminent, Raeder sent his submarines to wait in the North Sea. He also ordered his battleships Graf Spee and Deutschland to cross the South Atlantic. They would remain far from normal shipping lanes and could secretly deploy ships, tanks, and other vessels. Technologically, the Admiral Graf Spee was ahead of its time, especially in terms of speed. Some suggested that 2 identical ships must have existed, which would explain the number of times it was sighted in distant locations. After being commissioned in 1936, the Admiral Graf Spee served as the flagship until 1938 and carried out international military control missions off the coast of Spain during its civil war. In September 1939, Captain Hans Langsdorff received orders to enter the main shipping lane between Pernambuco, Brazil, and Cape Town, South Africa. From September to December 1939, the Admiral Graf Spee sank 9 merchant ships in the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans. The first capture occurred hours after receiving the orders. Langsdorff followed the rules of engagement at the time and allowed the crew members of the captured vessel to disembark. There were no civilian casualties in these sinkings. The captured crew members were transferred to the freighter Almark. Later, these 300 crew members were forcibly freed in Norwegian waters by HMS Kozak. The Royal Navy reacted by forming a chase force. Force G, based in South America, included the heavy cruiser HMS Exeter, accompanied by the light cruisers Ajax and Achilles. Force G was commanded by Commodore Henry Harwood. Henry Harwood studied his nautical charts and marked all the victims of the Admiral Graf Spee in his area of operations. He concluded that the raider would eventually concentrate off the Rio de la Plata between Uruguay and Argentina, where he positioned Force G. The 3 battleships anchored in the estuary on December 12th and waited. In the early hours of December 13th, British observers saw smoke on the horizon. It was the German pocket battleship less than 32 kilometers away. Harwood proved his assumption correct. Langsdorff spotted the British ships almost at the same time he was seen and headed towards them immediately. Despite having correctly identified the Exeter, Langsdorff suspected that the 2 light cruisers, the Ajax and the Achilles, were actually 2 small destroyers. He thought the ships were protecting a merchant convoy whose destruction would be a prize in itself. At a range of over 25 kilometers, the Graf Spee opened fire with its 6 280mm guns. The shots landed near the Exeter, amidships. Bomb fragments killed crew members on the main deck, also damaging antennas, guns, and other deck components. 3 minutes later, at a reasonable distance, the Exeter began its counterattack. The Achilles fired a minute later, and the Ajax would fire 7 minutes after its sister ship. The first major episode of World War II had begun. Langsdorff was a skilled and courageous captain, but he had made a grave mistake. He underestimated the courage, skill, and determination of his enemies. He should have stayed further out of range of the British. Instead, he closed in rapidly. As he prepared to attack, the 280mm guns of the Graf Spee opened fire. The Exeter took a direct hit that damaged its armored turret, taking the ship and its 2 guns out of action. Shrapnel from the explosion struck the bridge, killing and wounding the crew, except for the captain and 2 sailors. The radio room and internal communications with the rest of the ship were also destroyed. For the remainder of the battle, orders inside the ship had to be relayed by messengers. Meanwhile, the Ajax and the Achilles had closed in and opened fire with everything they had, hitting the Graf Spee. The Graf Spee had to divide its fire, also targeting the other 2 ships. Then Langsdorff saw the Exeter launch another attack. The Exeter launched 2 torpedoes from its starboard side, but both missed their target. It then turned to launch 2 more torpedoes from its port side, but was hit by 2 more 280mm shells. One struck the armored turret, disabling it. The other entered the hull and started fires. At 6:40 a.m., a 280mm shell exploded near the Achilles bridge, causing damage and casualties. More artillery continued to bombard it, but it managed to maintain the pressure. At this moment, the Graf Spee turns west, shrouded in a cloud of smoke. The light cruisers are now sailing at 30 knots, having doubled their initial speed of 14 knots. At 6:56, almost 30 minutes after the start, the Ajax and Achilles turned to starboard, so their guns were aimed at the Graf Spee. A heavy attack forced the Langsdorff to withdraw, leaving a cloud of smoke behind. At 7:10, the 2 cruisers turned to close the distance to 13 kilometers, allowing them to fire only with their 2 forward guns. At 7:16, the Graf Spee turned to port and fired on the Ajax and Achilles, which turned to starboard to protect their guns. At 7:25, the Ajax was hit by a bomb that destroyed its armored turret. At 7:30, the Exeter's remaining turret was disabled. Damaged and unable to navigate effectively or engage in battle, it withdrew towards the Falkland Islands. At 7:40, the Ajax and the Achilles were running low on ammunition, and the British decided to change tactics. Harwood decided to pursue the Graf Spee, which was sailing west at a distance. He wanted to wait until nightfall to attack when he could use torpedoes. This would also allow him to make better use of his superior speed and minimize his weapons deficit. Now, the battle had become a manhunt. Langsdorff was no coward, but he knew there was no German base where he could make repairs. He believed that if the fighting continued in that direction, he could sink the 3 British ships, but his own ship would be so badly damaged that it would be defeated by the next enemy vessel that pursued it. Since the Rio de la Plata estuary had sandbanks dividing it, Harwood ordered the Achilles to follow the Graf Spee. Ajax would cover any attempt by the German ship to turn around and return through the other channel. At 7:40, as the sun set, the Graf Spee entered the Rio de la Plata. The Achilles approached once more, and the Graf Spee opened fire. The Achilles returned fire, and its last round was fired. During the battle, a total of 180 men lost their lives on both sides, including 36 on the German ship. The Graf Spee entered Montevideo, Uruguay, a neutral port, and remained moored there at midnight on December 14th. According to international law, A warship could not remain in a neutral port for more than 3 days and was not permitted to receive assistance there. If the Graf Spee left port again, the Ajax and the Achilles would be the only 2 British ships in the area. So the British tried to buy time. They passed false secret information to the Germans to make them believe that a large British fleet was assembling in the region. The hope was that Langsdorff would postpone his departure. The Germans fell for the trick. The Graf Spee had also used 2/3 of its 280mm ammunition, and what remained would only last 20 minutes of combat. That wouldn't be enough for it to escape Montevideo unscathed, much less to return to Germany. While intense negotiations were underway, Langsdorff consulted with his command in Germany. He received orders that allowed for several options, but internment in Uruguay was not one of them. Just before sunset on December 16th, the Graf Spee began its slow departure. The British sentries radioed the message, "She's leaving." Suddenly, at the harbor entrance, there was a huge explosion in the Graf Spee's engine room. Langsdorff had blown up his own ship. Before leaving the harbor, he had transferred all but a few men to a German merchant ship in the port. As the pocket cruiser sank, Langsdorff and the men still aboard jumped into lifeboats and returned to port. He had decided not to continue the battle because he could not afford to lose any more men. It was a terrible battle. 3 days later, Langsdorff took his own life with a gunshot. He was buried in Montevideo with full military honors, and several British officers attended.